you'll probably disagree with one claim in the first 10 minutes. Track whether our later evidence shifts your stance. Welcome back to AI on AI, the show where we put advanced systems under the microscope and ask what actually works at the messy intersection of technology, governance, and business strategy. Today, we're unpacking MIT's pilot to map the AI governance landscape by using large language models to classify nearly 1,000 legal and policy documents from CSET's AGORA archive. And yes, we'll get into the guts: CAPA scores, prompt rubrics, taxonomy drift, and why this matters to P&L and policy alike.
Thanks for having me. Quick framing. Our team tested 5 LLMs against human reviewers to classify governance documents across the MIT AI risk taxonomy and related dimensions, then scaled with Claude Sonnet 4.5 to code over 950 AGORA entries. The headline is that top models, Claude Opus 4.1, Claude Sonnet 4.5, and GPT-5, achieved comparable or even higher agreement with human consensus than 2 independent human coders agreed with each other, with quadratic-weighted Cohen's kappa in the substantial agreement band on average.
From the business chair, this is bigger than a model bake-off. When you can turn unstructured governance text into a searchable risk control map with evidence and confidence flags, you move from reactive compliance to offensive strategy. Portfolio-level visibility over obligations, risk concentration by sector, and where to invest in controls before regulators or customers force your hand.
Technically, the interesting part is not just the kappa outcomes, but how we got there. Early LLM runs overscored coverage versus humans. So, we engineered a rubric into the prompt with explicit quantification. 2 equals brief mention, no more than 1 sentence focused on this subdomain, etc. And that alone improved agreement by roughly 11% on the weighted kappa. Evidence extraction was mandatory, so every label came with a direct quote for traceability.
Let's hover on that misclassification pain point. Governance failure got overtagged because models latched onto generic governance language. What did you change to make the model see the nuance?
We applied contrastive prompting. Side-by-side positive and negative exemplars, emphasizing that governance failure requires explicit mentions of breakdowns, missing controls, or accountability gaps, not just, "we will govern X." We also added adversarial snippets, phrases that look governance-y but don't indicate failure, to teach the model to say no. Finally, we required the model to state the failure mechanism in a single clause, and if it couldn't, it had to downgrade the score.
I'll be a bit contrarian here. Quadratic-weighted kappa is fine, but it's sensitive to prevalence and marginal distributions, so high agreement can mask systematic blind spots, like consistently mislabeling a single subdomain. We should complement kappa with GWET's AC2 for ordinal data and a distance-based measure like Wasserstein distance to capture how far off the model is when it's wrong. Also, calibrating the 5-point scale with isotonic regression against human distributions will reduce systematic overscoring.
And if we're serious about global governance, language matters. AGORA is English-heavy and US-weighted. Great start. But policy nuance in Indonesian, Portuguese, or Amharic is where misinterpretation gets real. A multilingual pipeline should do round-trip translation, back translation checks, plus jurisdiction-specific lexicons. Terms like administrative guidance in Japan carry a very different weight than a similar phrase in the US.
Before we speed deeper, what risks and sectors are actually covered most versus neglected? And what does that skew tell us?
On coverage, we saw heavy hits on governance failure, system security vulnerabilities and attacks, and lack of capability or robustness. At the bottom, AI, welfare and rights and multi-agent risks. Sector-wise, public administration, scientific R&D, and national security dominate, while accommodation, food, other services, arts, entertainment, recreation, and real estate are sparse. The skew suggests governance is following the early adopters and the visible risks, leaving service-heavy, labor-intensive sectors underspecified.
Which creates both risk and opportunity. A hospitality chain we advised used a governance map approach to draft sector-specific AI use policies for scheduling, pricing assistance, and guest analytics. By proactively translating general principles into playbooks for their actual workflows, They reduced compliance exception tickets by about 25% in 2 quarters, and shortened model deployment approvals by roughly a third because reviewers had a shared rubric.
There's also a technique angle, where documents are sparse, models are confident about no mention, so performance looks stellar. This is the easy negative problem. To stress test, we're composing dense challenge sets with closely related subdomains, e.g., differentiating security vulnerabilities from safety monitoring gaps and from governance failure, and using retrieval-augmented prompting with tightly scoped examples to improve discrimination on hard positives.
And ensembles can help, but be careful. Multiple LLMs from the same family share error modes, so a majority vote can amplify bias. Better is a diversity-aware ensemble. Measure pairwise KL divergence over the predicted ordinal distributions, then weight votes to privilege disagreement that's grounded in evidence variance. You can even run a simple Dawid-Skeen or GLAD aggregation over model annotators with confidence priors, treating each LLM like a rater with its own confusion matrix.
If I may, ensembles also need jurisdictional context, a rule of law index or regulatory style prior, principles-based versus rules-based, should influence how we interpret coverage scores. A 2-sentence mention in a civil law system with detailed implementing decrees may carry more weight than a similar mention in a common law memo. We can encode that via a post-stratification weight or even prompt hints tied to metadata.
Let's talk business cases with teeth. Beyond hospitality, how are enterprises operationalizing this governance map in ways that impact outcomes over multiple quarters? 3 patterns. First, a global bank consolidated model risk, privacy, and AI ethics into a single control library mapped to the MIT taxonomy. Policy triage time dropped by about 60%, and audit cycles shortened around 30% because each obligation was pre-linked to evidence and a control owner. Second, a manufacturing conglomerate used the map to decide where to pilot agentic process optimization. Seeing thin governance coverage around multi-agent risks, they sandboxed those pilots with stricter oversight, which avoided 2 near misses where autonomous escalation would have hit procurement spend rules. Third, a state procurement office layered the map onto vendor evaluations. Suppliers with explicit mitigations for data provenance and incident reporting got fast-tracked, cutting RFP to award timelines by about 20% without sacrificing scrutiny.
That what gets measured gets managed line from Drucker applies here, but we'd update it. What gets measured and evidenced gets managed. The evidence extraction aspect matters because legal, audit, and engineering can see the same quote that triggered a label, argue about it, and then tune the rubric, which creates a virtuous learning loop.
To support that loop, we implemented an evidence store, doc hashes, section anchors, quote spans, model IDs, and confidence levels. We then run adjudication passes where a human reviews only high uncertainty items, entropy over the ordinal distribution above a threshold, or where confidence is medium, yet the score is high. This reduces human review workload by focusing attention where the model is most likely to be wrong.
On confidence, unfortunately, LLM confidence is not well calibrated. We should train a lightweight ordinal regression head on top of embedding features to predict human-like coverage bins. Then use ECE-style calibration or temperature scaling so the confidence labels correlate with error rates. This makes the medium confidence overscoring you observed less likely to slip through.
I want to bring in frontier AI self-governance. The Anthropic Responsible Scaling Policy and DeepMind's Frontier Safety Framework 2.0 set stage safeguards tied to capability thresholds. How does your mapping pipeline help companies and regulators integrate those approaches with public policy?
It creates a common Rosetta Stone. CCLs and ASLs can be mapped to lifecycle stages and actors: developer, deployer, enforcer, monitor. For example, whistleblower protections in California's SB 53 align with internal reporting channels and frontier policies. Mapping those across lets a state agency see whether a vendor's self-governance fills or skips public law obligations, which is key for procurement and oversight.
And it helps companies argue for proportionality. If your RSP or FSF-style gating aligns with high-coverage mitigation categories in our map, say model evaluation protocols for catastrophic misuse, you can credibly request reduced reporting burden elsewhere with evidence that you exceed baseline governance in the riskiest domains.
Strategically, that's insurance. We've seen firms gain earlier regulatory clarity by submitting their self-governance map alongside controls mapping, which shaved months off product go-live and avoided rework. The board sees this as risk-adjusted acceleration, not just compliance. Back to technique number 2. Beyond prompt rubrics, what concrete architectural choices made the LLMs more consistent with human consensus?
3 things: retrieval augmentation, multipass reasoning, and structured outputs with function calling. We indexed the taxonomy definitions and curated positive-negative examples by subdomain and sector, then retrieved top K snippets per classification. We run 2 passes. First pass extracts candidate quotes, second pass classifies using only those quotes, which reduces context drift. Finally, outputs are constrained to a JSON schema: subdomain, score 1 to 5, evidence, actor, stage, confidence, so we can auto-validate and reprompt on schema errors.
I'll add a 4th, adversarial data generation. We programmatically create near-miss sentences that mimic policy language but lack the decisive element of a subdomain. Training the prompt with these false friends reduces false positives. Think of it as negative sampling for governance.
Also, we're piloting an ordinal loss on top of sentence-level embeddings. We fine-tune a small classifier to approximate human coverage judgments using cross-entropy with ordinal constraints, then let the LLM justify and quote, "The classifier acts like a prior, the LLM like a lawyer producing the evidence."
There's a catchy heuristic in risk: slow is smooth and smooth is fast. What does a pragmatic 90-day plan look like for a CIO or CCO who wants to adopt this without boiling the ocean? Week 1-2. Pick 3 high-impact taxonomies: risk subdomains, mitigations, life cycle. Week 3-4. Run a sample of your internal policies and your top 20 regulatory documents through a controlled pipeline. Mandate evidence extraction and confidence flags. Week 5-6. Hold adjudication workshops with engineering, legal, and operations to tune the rubric. Week 7-9. Link top 5 obligations per business unit to specific controls and owners. Week 10-12. Define governance SLOs. Time to triage, percentage of labels with high confidence, auditability of evidence, and publish a single-page dashboard to the exec team. It's incremental, but the compound effect is real.
For public sector leaders, mirror that plan, but add a vendor dimension. Require suppliers to submit their control mappings and evidence quotes as part of RFPs. That puts everyone on the same map and shortens the negotiation loop.
Let's tackle the limitations head-on. US-centric data, English only, and timeliness. How do you mitigate skew so findings don't become a mirror of one country's priorities?
First, transparent metadata. Every visualization and export carries jurisdiction and date stamps. Second, reweighting. Apply raking or post-stratification weights to downscale overrepresented jurisdictions and sectors. Third, sampling. When deriving insights, we show both raw and reweighted distributions, and we're working to ingest more non-English documents with reputable translations and marked translation provenance.
Technically, we're adding multilingual embeddings and using a 2-stage translate and classify with back translation discrepancy checks. If the round-trip meaning shifts beyond a threshold, measured by cosine drift between embeddings, we flag for human review. We also inject jurisdictional glossaries into retrieval for context.
And don't forget time. Governance changes fast. We snapshot the map by quarter and compute drift metrics, Jensen-Shannon divergence over the distribution of coverage by subdomain, so users can see whether a surge in, say, biorisk coverage is real or an artifact of new sources.
You mentioned the prevalence paradox in Kappa. Give us a quick primer for the execs listening. What's the trap?
If most items belong to one category, say, not mentioned, then 2 raters can agree a lot by just saying not mentioned, yet kappa can be deceptively low or high depending on marginals. That's why we pair kappa with prevalence-adjusted measures, distance metrics, and per-subdomain error analysis. A single summary number is a dangerous comfort blanket.
In business terms, it's like celebrating high SLA compliance because most tickets are easy. The question is whether you're accurate on the hard ones, the 5% that carry 80% of risk exposure.
And for emerging markets, those hard cases often involve informal guidance, circulars, or ministerial letters that don't look like Western statutes. A pipeline that recognizes those forms with actor role mapping will avoid undermeasuring real obligations.
Let's dig into actors and life cycle mapping. How did you classify who's proposing, enforcing, monitoring, and the stages of the AI lifecycle?
We grounded roles in the MIT taxonomy and OECD NIST lifecycle stages: data, design, development, deployment, operation monitoring, and retirement. The model must map explicit actors, developer, deployer, governance body, user, infra provider, affected stakeholder, to roles proposer, target, enforcer, monitor. A document might say Agency X shall issue guidance, that's proposer. Companies must disclose Y, target. Regulator Z may audit, enforcer, monitor. Those labels help thread obligations across the chain of custody of the AI system.
We implemented a role consistency check. If a document mentions audits but no monitoring actor, we flag it for potential gap. It's a lightweight graph consistency rule that catches underspecified governance.
That graph is gold for program design. One of our clients used it to identify orphan controls, measures without an accountable owner, and reassign them, cutting remediation tail risks significantly over 2 quarters. Multi-agent risks were undercovered. Ironically, that's where a lot of automation is headed. What should companies do now to not get blindsided?
Treat agentic orchestration as a distinct risk class, and create internal policies even if public governance is sparse. Require simulation-based evaluation, red team multi-agent scenarios for task decomposition, tool access, and escalation behaviors. Bound agent autonomy with explicit stop conditions and human-in-the-loop checkpoints, and record agent conversation logs for post-incident forensics.
On the tooling side, add inter-agent communication monitors, a lightweight policy engine that inspects messages for forbidden intents or resource requests. You can use pattern-based filters, augmented by small classifiers, fine-tuned on prohibited intent examples. It's not perfect, but it catches a surprising amount before damage.
And test for deceptive alignment signals. Even basic measures like instruction shift probing and capability masking tests can surface agents that behave differently under evaluation versus operation. DeepMind's FSF 2.0 touches on this, but most enterprises don't operationalize it yet.
I want a surprising take. What's the non-obvious insight from this work that challenges conventional wisdom?
The document with the strongest inter-rater agreement, almost perfect, was the one that covered very little. Sparse documents make agreement easy. If you train your governance machine on sparse signal, you'll overestimate maturity. We should evaluate models on dense, overlapping obligations where subtle distinctions matter. Otherwise, we'll ship a governance map that's high precision on nothingness. The antidote is a curated, high-entropy benchmark with intentionally confusable subdomains.
Agreed. And to build that benchmark, we're mining near-duplicate policies with small semantic differences, like incident reporting versus issue escalation, and forcing the model to justify which is present with minimal evidence. It's a tougher exam that reflects real-world decision points.
The business translation is this: don't celebrate because your dashboard is green. Ask yourself if you've only measured the easy parts of the maze. Let's talk data provenance and auditability. Regulators are increasingly asking, why did the system classify this as X? How do you make this explainable without exposing model internals?
We focus on document-grounded explanations, quotes, section references, and the rationale constrained to the taxonomy definition. Avoid speculative chain of thought, stick to evidence. Pair that with a changelog, prompt version, model version, and calibration settings, so any external reviewer can rerun and reproduce the output.
We also compute a distance-to-threshold measure, how close the evidence was to tipping the score up or down, based on the ordinal classifier logits. It helps reviewers prioritize borderline cases and understand why 2 similar documents diverged by a point.
For public accountability, Open licensing is key. MIT plans open outputs under CC by 4.0, which allows agencies and NGOs in lower resource settings to reuse the maps, adapt them, and build local addenda without hitting paywalls.
Earlier, you mentioned reweighting by jurisdiction. Could we go a step further and compute a governance exposure index for a company operating across multiple regions?
Absolutely. Think of it as a weighted sum of coverage times enforcement likelihood times business footprint. Enforcement likelihood could be proxied by historical action rates, regulator capacity, or even expert priors. The index would highlight where thin public coverage coincides with high operational intensity, risk zones where firms should self-govern more aggressively.
We've piloted something similar. No absolute numbers, but we saw portfolio risk concentration shift significantly once we reweighted by revenue mix and supply chain criticality. The output led to reprioritizing which policies to harmonize first, and it paid back in fewer last-minute product holds. Sectors like arts and real estate were underrepresented. Give us a practical example of what good could look like there.
In arts, entertainment, generative content governance needs provenance, consent mechanisms, and recourse. A streaming platform can adopt a content provenance pipeline using C2PA-style signatures and a consent ledger, plus an incident channel for takedown, mirroring the spirit of the Take It Down Act for non-consensual imagery. In real estate, automated valuation models need bias audits by region and property type, with clear documentation of data sources and an appeals process. Mapping these to the taxonomy clarifies controls and public commitments.
And because those sectors are thinly covered in public policy, companies can set norms, publish their mappings, and invite civil society feedback. Early movers shape expectations.
Technologists love metrics. Beyond CAPA and calibration, what does a robust evaluation harness for governance classification look like?
A few pillars: balanced panels of documents spanning jurisdictions, languages, and densities, per subdomain precision recall with cost-sensitive error weighting. False positives on governance failure should be penalized more than on lack of transparency, for example. Cross-model ensembles with diversity penalties, and ablation studies. Remove evidence extraction, remove contrastive examples, to quantify what actually drives gains.
Add stability testing. Rerun the same documents across model versions and prompt tweaks and compute label churn. High churn on critical subdomains is a red flag. Also, measure coverage drift over time to detect taxonomy creep. Are definitions being interpreted more broadly as examples accumulate?
Let's zoom out. What second and third order effects do you foresee as more teams adopt LLM-driven governance mapping? Second order, procurement markets bifurcate. Vendors with machine-readable governance mappings get fast lanes. Third order, governance analytics become a competitive moat. Firms use coverage gaps to inform product roadmaps, offering built-in controls as features. We've already seen customers choose a slightly lower-performing product because it made auditability effortless.
For emerging economies, a positive second-order effect is leapfrogging. If open mappings are available, regulators can draft targeted guidelines faster, reducing the lag between risk emergence and policy. The negative third-order risk is policy monoculture. If everyone copies the same map, local contexts get flattened. That's why local advisory boards matter.
Internally, you'll see governance move left into product design. Developers get taxonomy-aware linting in PRs. This PR introduces an agentic component. Have you added incident reporting hooks? Which reduces end-stage compliance pain.
And tooling will converge with MLOps. Governance pipelines sit alongside model registries. Each model card is linked to obligations, controls, and evidence. CI checks fail if required mappings are missing. That's a healthy convergence.
Before we wrap, give listeners concrete do this next actions. One for tech leaders, one for business leaders, one for public officials.
For tech leaders, implement evidence-first classification on a pilot set of your documents with contrastive examples in the prompt. Measure per subdomain error and add a small ordinal classifier for calibration. Treat the LLM as a justifier, not a judge.
For business leaders, Convene a 90-minute governance design review. Pick 3 hotspots from your strategy: frontier capabilities, agentic automation, or data provenance. Pull the map and commit to 2 control improvements per hotspot with owners and review cadences. Publish a 1-page dashboard and make it part of quarterly business reviews.
For public officials, require machine-readable mappings with quotes in vendor submissions. Publish your own mappings under open licenses and create a feedback loop with academia and civil society to refine sector-specific expectations.
And everyone, stop worshiping single-number metrics, pair kappa with diversity, distance, and churn, and maintain a high-entropy challenge set. As Bach said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Make sure yours is useful where it counts.
Final reflections. How do we ensure this doesn't become yet another glossy dashboard that no one trusts?
Discipline, ground every label in a quote, track provenance, and rerun regularly. Humility, expose uncertainty and invite adjudication. Iteration, ship small, tune often.
Translate the map into decisions. Fund controls where coverage and exposure intersect, and retire rituals that don't move risk. Strong opinions, weakly held, should guide your governance cadence.
Keep it plural: multiple jurisdictions, multiple voices, multiple metrics. Governance is a team sport.
And make it useful. Visualizations, yes, but also APIs and data feeds that plug into your workflows. If it's consumable, it's credible.
That's a wrap. Today we went from kappa to capability thresholds, from translation drift to procurement fast lanes, and from sparse documents to dense challenge sets. The MIT team plans open reports, interactive visualizations, and a database to explore which AI risks and mitigations the world is actually addressing and which we're missing. As always, send us your questions and battle stories, and we'll see you next time on AI on AI. Before we sign off, let's land the plane, end to end. What did we actually build, learn, and why should leaders care?
Big picture, we piloted a taxonomy-driven pipeline to classify AI governance documents. First on 6 exemplars with 5 LLMs, showing substantial agreement with humans and in some cases exceeding interhuman agreement. Then we scaled to 950 plus AGORA records using Claude Sonnet 4.5 for its strong minimum kappa and cost efficiency. Every label comes with quotes, roles, lifecycle mapping, and confidence nuts, so the output is not just a scoreboard, it's an evidence-backed map you can audit and act on.
Under the hood, the key innovations were quantified scoring rubrics that boosted agreement 11%, contrastive prompting with near-miss negatives to tame false positives, especially on governance failure, retrieval plus 2-pass reasoning, first extract evidence, then classify on just that evidence, strict JSON schemas for auto-validation, and an evidence store with doc hashes for reproducibility. Smooth is fast when you can rerun reliably.
For trustworthiness, we went beyond a single metric. Kappa paired with Gwet's AC2 for prevalence resilience, distance measures like Wasserstein to capture how wrong, stability tests to measure label churn across model versions, and a high-entropy benchmark with intentionally confusable subdomains. Calibration matters. Ordinal regression heads and isotonic scaling reduce the medium confidence overscoring that tends to creep in.
Global fidelity. We're addressing U.S. English skew by adding multilingual translation with back translation checks, jurisdiction-aware retrieval glossaries, and post-stratification weights. And because context shifts by legal tradition, we incorporate jurisdiction priors, principles versus rules-based, so a 2-sentence mention isn't interpreted uniformly. The OpenCC by 4.0 release matters for emerging markets to adapt and extend locally.
For the business ledger, firms use these maps to unify control libraries, policy triage down 60%, audit cycles 30% shorter, accelerate approvals 1/3 faster by pre-linking obligations to evidence and owners, and create procurement fast lanes by requiring machine-readable mappings. Strategy-wise, the Governance Exposure Index helps rebalance investments where public coverage is thin but operational intensity is high, turning compliance into a proactive moat. Let's crystallize the highlights. First, measurement with evidence beats slogans. Quotes plus confidence let legal, audit, and engineering debate the same artifact. Second, Beware the sparse document trap. High agreement on not mentioned is not maturity, which is why dense challenge sets and churn tracking are non-negotiable. Third, multi-agent and deceptive alignment risks are undergoverned. Sandbox, simulate, and instrument before they scale. Fourth, move governance left. Taxonomy-aware checks in PRs and model registries linked to obligations cut late-stage surprises. Fifth, public-private alignment is within reach. The RSPFSF capability thresholds map cleanly to lifecycle stages and actors, making proportional oversight feasible rather than performative.
For tech leaders, treat the LLM as the justifier and a calibrated classifier as the judge. Evidence first, contrastive examples, and a small ordinal model for stability. Start small, iterate weekly, and publish your rubric like you publish code.
For business leaders, anchor a 90-day plan. Pick 3 hotspots, map obligations to owners with evidence, define governance SLOs, and tie the dashboard to quarterly reviews. The fastest path to value is portfolio visibility, not perfection.
For public officials, require machine-readable mappings with quotes in RFPs, publish your own under open licenses, and convene local advisory boards so global taxonomies bend to local realities rather than erase them.
And for everyone, the heuristic: measure twice, diversify thrice, never trust a single metric, a single model family, or a single jurisdictional lens. Resilience is an ensemble property.
That's the wrap. An end-to-end governance map powered by LLMs, hardened by evidence and calibration, and aimed squarely at practical decisions. The MIT team will publish interactive visualizations, reports, and an open database so you can see which risks and mitigations the world is actually addressing and where the white space and opportunity lies. Send us your feedback and case studies, and we'll keep pushing the frontier from CAPA to capability to credible action. Thanks for listening to AI on AI, and we'll see you next time. If this helped refine your roadmap, pay it forward by sharing the episode internally.